Dr. Sharon Grossman, thank you for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off a very serious conversation by outlining some of the ways that obesity and overeating are not just unhealthy behaviors, but actually represent the type of public health crisis in the Western world. That's a pretty big opening and a pretty big statement, topic sentence, but perhaps you could take it from there.
So today, believe it or not, obesity is responsible for more deaths than smoking. Obesity contributes to 500,000 deaths each year, which breaks down to about 1,300 per day. And smoking only causes 1,000 per day. We're talking about 2.4 years of life loss. And this is based on old data. We know that obesity, the prevalence of obesity in the United States and really across the world has increased since then. So we're talking about a very, very severe crisis, and which really contributes tremendously to loss of life. Why is that? Because it increases the risk of every area. It affects basically every area of health and increases the risk of virtually every disease. So, for example, someone who is obese is 67% more likely to have chronic disease than someone who is normal weight. And how does that compare to smoking, other risk factors, heavy drinkers? So being a daily smoker increases that risk by 25%. For normal weight individuals, being a heavy drinker increases it only by 12%. It has the effect of taking you from age 30 to age 50 in terms of aging. We shouldn't talk about age 50 for aging for some of us.
Let's stay away from that.
It increases the risk. It puts you in the same area of risk of someone who lives in poverty. It increases the risk of diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It increases the risk of a heart attack, dying of a heart attack, stroke, dying of any cause. I could go on and on. Sleep apnea, osteoarthritis. It increases the risk of 13 different kinds of cancers. As an oncologist, that's something that I'm particularly sensitive to. It increases the risk of difficult fertility problems. It makes pregnancy more complicated. It leads to erectile dysfunction. And the longer that you're obese, the more that this is a risk.
And the numbers you said in terms of 1,300 per day, that's in the United States?
That's in the United States. So in Israel, thanks for pointing that out. In Israel, we also unfortunately suffer from overweight and obesity. 60% of the population in Israel is overweight. About 26% is obese. The numbers have not gotten better since October 7th. We're eating fattier food. We're not exercising as much. Those 12 days with Iran, I couldn't go out to run. I wasn't going to go into the pool because I didn't want to run into the mud, all wet. So it's a problem here. And unfortunately, it's also a problem in the Orthodox community.
And I believe that I've heard that once upon a time, people thought that obesity was a disease of the wealthy or the well-off, and that's probably not true anymore. Is that correct?
So it has not, that is correct. Unfortunately, it has now reached low-income countries, and more people in the world are actually dying of obesity-related disease than hunger.
Wow. Can you define obesity, though? I mean, I just think of, someone who has a weight problem, but what exactly is obesity technically defined?
So that's it's not a straightforward question. The yardstick that we generally use is BMI, body mass index, which is kilograms per meter squared. And it breaks down to their actual number breakdowns. So a BMI from 18.0 to 24.9 is healthy. 25.0 to 29.9 is overweight, and then 30.0 and above is obesity, and there are different classes of obesity above that number. There are a lot of difficulties with using BMI as a measure of obesity because it doesn't account for muscle. And so you could be an athlete and have a lot of muscle and have a high BMI, but quite healthy and at very low risk for obesity-related diseases. At the same time, there's something called normal weight obesity. So you can have high fat content in your body, but be a normal BMI and be at higher risk. It doesn't account for differences in ethnicities. Asian people tend to have obesity-related diseases at lower. So there are other ways, though, of calculating BMI. There's weight circumference, weight to hip ratio, but this is generally what we use to calculate obesity, to address obesity and also overweight.
Okay. If somebody is obese and decides to tackle that problem, they want to overcome it, to what degree is the fact that they've been obese for a while? Let's say you have a 50-year-old who's been obese for 20 years. I don't want to say, are they doomed? Is it too late? It's tackling the problem later in life, something which can still help undermine or stop some of those conditions that are a result of obesity.
So even losing a little bit of weight can minimize some of those the obesity-related diseases. And yes, there's a benefit no matter when you try. I imagine we'll talk a little bit later about weight loss medicine, but we know that older adults who use weight loss medicine, we know from older adults who have weight loss surgery benefit from the weight loss surgery, and so there really is no age group where there wouldn't be health benefits.
One of the ideas that I found shocking was when you shared with me some research outlining how many calories the average Orthodox or religious Jew eats on a typical Shabbat. The number comes out, if I recall, to between 2 and 3 times the recommended daily caloric intake. And I certainly don't, and I'm guessing other people don't realize quite how much we're eating on Shabbat without paying attention to what we're eating and the fact that it's actually a health risk.
That's right. There is a doctor in Yerushalayim, and I'll share this with our audience, actually computed how much a person typically eats in Shabbat. And we're not talking about outrageous quantities. We're talking about, really, I'll show our readers, not a lot. We're not eating, it doesn't seem like we're eating to excess, and yet the numbers would teach us otherwise. And so let me show you what we have. Oops.
And I'll just say, for those people who are listening to the audio of this podcast, you should go to the Orthodox Conundrum page on YouTube, the Orthodox Conundrum channel on YouTube, where you can actually see the charts that Sharon is putting up right now.
Okay, so let's start with Friday night. A piece of baked chicken, some challah, some brisket, maybe some salad, a piece of gefilte fish, some grape juice, matzo ball soup, piece of chocolate cake, maybe a chocolate chip cookie, adds up to 1,867 calories.
Okay.
Kiddush. So a chocolate chip cookie, some cholent, some soda. This is not a huge amounts of food. Quickly adds up to 1,068 calories. Lunch, some challah, some cholent. You just walked away from Kiddush, but yet we're eating. We keep eating. More grape juice, maybe some tafudi for dessert, a piece of chocolate cake, 2,360 calories. Shalosh shudas. Who is even hungry for shalosh shudas? A challah roll, some herring, a little tuna salad, a little egg salad, 835 calories. And what does that give us in the end? Gives us a whopping 6,130 calories, which, as you said, Scott, is twice, even 3 times the daily allotment of calories. Now, some people might say there are no calories on Shabbos, but the scale says otherwise on Sunday morning. And actually, some rigorous scientific research shows that normal weight women on Shabbat eat 1,000 more calories than they do during the week. And overweight and obese women eat between 1,500 to 2,000 calories more. And so the authors of that study actually hypothesized that our behaviors on Shabbat are predisposing us to obesity and being overweight, that they do contribute.
That's actually disturbing in a different kind of way. And I speak now from a hashkafic halachic perspective, which is that we have ideas in Chazal. Chazal tell us, for example, Banai levu alai, borrow from me or use me as your guarantor. You can spend money on Shabbat for food and it won't count against your yearly allotment of money. That's something which we also know. It says the money we get, we are allotted on Rosh Hashanah. The food for Shabbat and Yom Tov doesn't count, Chazal tell us. There are various agadic, admittedly, but agadic statements which seem to say, don't really worry about Shabbos. And that's, as you put it, calories don't count on Shabbos. I guess I'd call it the colloquial way of describing that nowadays is, oh, if you eat on Shabbos, it doesn't count. And yet it does. I'm asking, I'm not even sure exactly what I'm asking, except how do we overcome this? We're talking about a culture which has been in place for thousands of years that on Shabbat you should eat a lot. And you're saying it's a serious health problem.
So it's actually so funny that you mentioned this because last night my husband woke me up from sleep to tell me that Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein just issued what started off as a ruling. He was asked about eating cholent on Thursday nights. My kids do it. They run to Bnei Brak on Thursday night. It's a thing. And he was asked, does this take away from Oneg Shabbat? Because we're bringing that to Thursday night. And so he said that it's very appropriate not to eat cholent on weekdays so that you can delight in it on Shabbat as is proper. And then he went on to note that it's not just, that there are actually health issues at stake here. What are the health issues? That Shabbat protects you, there are harmful effects to eating cholent, and that Shabbat protects you from them, and you wouldn't have that benefit on Shabbat. He led to a whole controversy, and his grandson eventually kind of modified the statement. But there is this notion that Shabbat helps us protect us from the harmful effects of food. I spent a lot of time looking at the halachic basis for this. Where does this come from? And there are a couple of potential sources, which again, most mainstream poskim don't hold by this, but there
And you're
are
speaking
some,
about the halachic sources of seeing obesity as a problem.
no halachic sources of saying that there's no problem, that there's no calories on
Oh, no
Shabbos.
calories on
Uh,
Shabbos.
and they're here and there are a few ideas that Breshit Rabbah teaches us that the food is delicious on Shabbat. And so Rav Chaim Rappaport talks about the Alexander Rebbe who told his students to lose weight and not eat a lot so that they wouldn't be drafted in the Russian army. But on Shabbat, they could eat because the food isn't fattening on Shabbat. There's also this notion that Sefer Shemot tells us, eat it today, for today is Shabbat, in reference to the man. And Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, the Lutzker Rebbe, says that from that we see that food, why did Moshe have to say that? Because people were worried if they ate the man on Shabbos, they would get sick. Because if you left it over a day, it would turn into worms. And so Moshe is coming to tell them, no, you're doing it for a mitzvah. It's not going to spoil. And based on this, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin says that people who diet shouldn't worry about what they eat on Shabbat. He's not telling them that they won't gain weight, but that they shouldn't worry. So there are these ideas here and there. But there really isn't a halachic basis for saying that food isn't fattening on Shabbat. At the same time, we have these very profound messages that eating is critical on Shabbat. Eating is a part of Oneg Shabbat. Masechet Shabbat tells us that how do we perform Oneg Shabbat? We do it by eating food. We do it by adding an extra meal, an extra course. We do it by the Rambam tells us to go spend more money on our food for Shabbat. The more we prepare, the more it's praiseworthy. The Gemara tells us about Rabbi Zera, who broke off a piece of bread that was bigger than a whole day's worth of bread. And he did it on Shabbat, and Ravina says, isn't that gluttony? And Rav Ashi says, no, because he doesn't do it during the week. And the Shulchan Aruch codifies that. Shulchan Aruch says that we should break off a big piece of bread on Shabbat. And so it sounds like what's being encouraged is overeating on Shabbat. But at the same time, when the Rambam talks about making more food on Shabbat, he's not talking about overeating. And the Shulchan Aruch recognizes the danger that for some people, eating may be harmful on Shabbat. He says if it's for tsar, if it causes tsar to someone, then he shouldn't eat. And the Mishnah Berurah codifies that. There are the Shlah, who is very reluctant to say that obesity, that overeating is asur, says that overeating on Shabbat is asur. And that people who think that it's owning Shabbat are actually just delighting themselves.
As opposed to delighting in the Shekhinah or in God.
He distinguishes between delighting in Shabbat and delighting on Shabbat. And what we must do is delight in Shabbat, like as we prepare for a special guest, and not delight on Shabbat, eat to excess. And so I think it's something we really have to think about as a community, how to experience Oneg Shabbat, but at the same time fulfill the mitzvah of V'nishmartem. And what does that mean? And how do we go about doing that?
V'nishmartem meaning to take care of your health as a halachic requirement.
Yes.
One of the issues I think might be simply, and this does relate to, we alluded to it before, but this does relate to the incredible wealth that we all have compared to previous generations. Even those of us who are not wealthy, quote unquote, have more food than previous generations could have imagined. When we talk about a big meal on Shabbat, once upon a time, they weren't talking about the size of the meals that we have now, the massive kiddush followed by the massive lunch, followed by the real shalosh seudos. The fact that they had to have shalosh seudot, the fact that it was a chidush, an innovation to have 3 meals as opposed to only 2 meals in a day. Now, most people have 3 meals a day, so we don't even notice that. It could well be that even if someone would have more on Shabbat, they weren't talking about what we have in the 21st century.
Correct. Ephraim Goldberg has spoken quite a bit on this topic, and he points out that back in the day when our grandparents lived, a typical Shabbos meal was a side dish, maybe a piece of gefilte fish, a piece of melon, followed by a piece of chicken, maybe a side dish, a piece of kugel, and a dessert. And somehow we have taken Shabbat to the next level where we have multiple courses, desserts that can rival a Viennese table. But it's not just limited to Shabbat. Baruch Hashem, we live in a time where so many products are kosher. And while on the one hand, it's really, I revel in it. It makes me so happy that there's so much kosher food available. At the same time, we have to wonder what that does to us. So there's a gas station right after you cross the George Washington Bridge and you come into New Jersey on Route 4 and you're going to Teaneck or Englewood. There's a gas station that we get gas at typically because we run out of gas coming from Boston. And there's a sign, there's a mincha minyan, and there's cholent inside. You walk inside of this gas station and it says you can't bring in anything from outside. There are 2 microwaves, a milchik one and a fleishik one, and you can buy cholent, and you can buy potato kugel, and you can buy lakshan kugel, and it's fantastic. I mean, to have that much kosher food is amazing. But at the same time, we have to wonder what that does and how that affects our overall health. Certainly. We're not eating cholent just on Shabbos, or not eating it just on Thursday night even. We're eating it in the middle of the week.
Right. And in my own mind, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, this is a separate issue, but I wonder if our predilection towards overeating, having these giant kiddushim, giant dinners, and even meals at home during the week that are sometimes over the top, might represent another example of the materialist mindset of the Western world entering the Orthodox world. It's a problem I've talked about on this podcast before, where people simply don't know where to draw the line, or more specifically, as I see it, when it comes to materialism or excess in general, it's not so much that they don't know where to draw the line as they don't realize there is a line in Torah Judaism. And I believe very much that there is such a line, that we have to be careful in that way. having a giant kiddush or a gorgeous meal at a wedding with endless courses might actually be a violation of certain Torah values. That is a different conversation, which you don't need to comment on that if you don't want to, but I think it's important to point that out as well.
Yeah, we have to think about what we are, just because it's kosher, just because we waited between milchik and fleisches, it has the highest kashrut certification. Is our eating really kosher?
Absolutely. I want to ask about the halachic issues of obesity as well. Do you know if any poskim talk about this in terms of an isur, a prohibition of overeating or prohibition or some sort of halachic attitude towards getting too fat?
So there isn't much discussion about. I think break your question up into three different parts. Is there discussion about obesity and how Jewish law approaches obesity? Is there, and then how does Jewish law approach eating to excess, which can be divided into really, really, stuffing yourself versus just eating a little bit more. So in terms of how Jewish law approaches obesity in general, there's very little discussion about it. In the poskim, Shmuel Kamenetsky has said that obesity is a machala. Malamed suggests that we have to take steps to combat obesity. I've had the absolute zchut and privilege to speak with Professor Avraham Steinberg on many issues of disease prevention. And one of them is obesity. And he says very explicitly in his Harufua Halacha that we have an obligation to take steps to prevent disease, and that includes preventing obesity or addressing it. And he very much emphasizes the importance of following medical guidelines, that there's a halachic obligation to follow the most recent medical guidelines, which would include taking steps to prevent obesity. In terms of behaviors that encourage obesity. So again, halacha, Jewish law, has a very complicated relationship with food, as you know. On the one hand, we are strongly encouraged to enjoy our food. The Yerushalmi tells us that at 120, when we come to Shamayim, Hashem is going to ask us if we sampled all of the delicious foods on earth. We know that the Nazir, the Gemara tells us that the Nazir it has to bring a korban. And the Gemara asks why. And the answer is because he deprived himself of wine, all the more so if we deprive ourselves of food. But at the same time, there are sources that strongly censure overeating, achilat gasa, and Mishlei, and then the Gemaras that talk about what's going to happen to a Talmid Chacham who overeats. And there seems to be a prohibition against achilat gasa, really eating to excess, that based on the Ramban and Kedoshim Tiyu, that Kedoshim Tiyu is there to tell us that just because the food is kosher, just because the meat is kosher, there are ways of eating it that are not kosher if we eat to excess. The Chafetz Chaim also suggests that achilat gasa interferes with mitzvah of lo taturu, do not lust after food, and there are halachic implications to achilat gasa. In three places, the Shulchan Aruch suggests that achilat gasa doesn't count as eating. So if you engage in achilat gasa, you don't make a bracha before it, you don't make a bracha after it. But halacha doesn't really define what achilat gasa is, this excessive coarse eating. The Shlag explains the reason for that, because for you, achilat gasa might be eating 3 hamburgers, whereas for someone else, it might be eating 2. Your body habitus is different. Your nutritional needs are different. How do we define achilat gasa? Based on one eating session? Is it based on what you do over the course of time? And ultimately, we don't really know what achilat gasa is, but we can't define it with objective numbers. But when you've done it,
Right.
at this
The Potter
time,
Stewart's line. I know it when I see it.
At the same time, though, Tosfot distinguishes between achilat gasa, which is eating when you're just, if eating anymore is going to make you want to vomit, and achilat gasa, where you're full and you keep eating. And the former does not have a halachic status of eating, and the latter does. And the Mishnah Berurah codifies that. In terms of tshuvot that talk about just eating a little bit more when you're full, there's not a lot. And what we have is the Rambam in Hilchot Deot, who says you should only eat when you're hungry, that you should eat to 3/4 full and not more than that. That overeating is a poison to the body, and halachic authorities. So Rav Moshe, Nishmat Avraham quotes Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. They distinguish between the Rambam's language in Hilchot Deot, where he's kind of making recommendations, versus his language in Hilchot Rotzeach, where he talks about anyone who wants to endanger himself will receive lashes, and seem to suggest that the discussion in Hilchot Deot about eating and not eating too much is more of a recommendation. That said, though, there are poskim who prohibit overeating. For example, the Aliyah Rabbah, Rabbi Eliezer Papo, says that overeating violates 3 prohibitions: Rak Hishamer, Pen Tishkach, and Bal Tishaksu, not to make yourself disgusting, and guard your health. And remember, the Pri Megadim quoted by the Mishnah Berurah brings this as well. And Pella Yoetz says that overeating, just eating a little bit more, violates the prohibition of Bal Tashchit, because you're wasting money on the food, and you're wasting time eating, and you're wasting time feeling bad afterwards because you overate. And in my conversations with Rav Steinberg, he suggested that the prohibition against that when we should make efforts to avoid overeating, this doesn't just include achilat gasa, eating when you can't eat anymore. It also might include eating when you're full.
Now, Sharon, do you think there are some explanations about why not that many poskim talk about it? You just mentioned some who do, but by and large, they largely don't. You started off saying, I would assume it's the same reason that several hundred years ago, they didn't talk about smoking either, because no one recognized it as a health issue so much. Are there other reasons other than no one having thought about it that it's not really mentioned by that many poskim?
So I've thought about that question quite a bit. I think that, yes, one issue is that they weren't aware. I think that as a society, we're not really aware. It wasn't until 2013 that the American Medical Association classified obesity as a disease. And there's still a lot of discussion and debate in the medical community whether we can classify obesity as a disease. I think there's this notion of Shomer P'taim Hashem, that God watches over the simple, and there's certain risks that we as a society are willing to accept. And obesity perhaps is one of them. Certainly, if 40% of the American population is obese, that demonstrates that they're willing to accept the risks. It's very hard to say that overeating, that there's a problem with overeating because, or eating certain foods, because it's hard to quantify how much of that would be a prohibition. Is the first bite a problem? Is the second bite? Is it the 10th bite? How can the first few bites sustain you and be part of an ishmart and the last few not? It's hard to quantify what achilat gasa is. And I've seen at least one halachic authority suggest that perhaps poskim are reluctant to say that these behaviors are asur because eating is the last indulgence that's allowed to us. And then something else that Rav Steinberg mentioned is that perhaps it's just so obvious that this is problematic, that these behaviors are problematic, that rabbanim, that halachic authorities haven't talked about it because it's so clearly interferes with v'nishmart. Right. So maybe there isn't a need for this kind of discussion. But be that as it may, it is problematic, and I imagine as these issues of obesity become more dramatic, and we as a society become more cognizant of them, that there will be more halachic authorities weighing in.
I'd like to switch gears now and ask about combating obesity. And we're going to go into then the idea of maybe undereating, which is on some level connected there. But let's first stick with this particular idea. Obviously, people know you can diet, you can exercise, but are there any particular ways that you would recommend? Because a lot of people have a hard time sticking to a diet. A lot of time people have a difficult time knowing what kind of exercise is good. Should I do weight training? Should I go on the elliptical? Should I jog? Each one has its benefits and its negatives. So, what are the best ways if someone wants to either avoid obesity or combat obesity? Offhand, what are the best ways to combat it?
So the obesity is very complicated, and I should just start by saying at the outset that it is more effective to prevent it than to treat it once it happens because it's very hard to lose that weight. We're biologically set to maintain a certain weight, and people who reach a certain weight have a very difficult time losing it because of that, not because of lack of trying, not because of lack of willpower, but because really we're evolutionary programmed to maintain that, to be at a certain weight. In terms of general recommendations, uh, eating healthfully, portion controlling, and exercising are important. But it's not just about diet and exercise. There are factors that are sometimes outside of our control, such as genetics, medications, underlying diseases. Uh, Getting a good night's sleep is important. Managing stress is important. So those are basic factors, but also seeking help and and seeking help from a nutritionist, maybe personal trainer, uh, and when it's not working out, knowing when to seek medical help. There are actually doctors who deal with obesity medicine, and they may have a whole different set of arsenals to help tackle this problem.
Okay, I'm going to talk about one of those weapons in the arsenal, specifically weight loss surgery. Sometimes people they get their stomach stapled. I think that's what's called colloquially. I don't know much about it except that it's something which people do, and I'd like to hear your take whether that's advisable or not advisable. Broadly speaking, obviously every individual has to speak to his or her doctor.
So the rationale behind the surgery is, as I said, that no matter how hard you try to lose weight, people generally gain it back, and that's not a voice of doom. We must keep trying, but at some point, it becomes in certain situations, it becomes quite difficult. And so, for example, 80% of people at 5 years will gain back weight that they've lost. Once you've reached a BMI 35 or higher, so that's class 2 obesity, the chances of keeping the weight off are 1%. And this is because of set point theory. We're evolutionary programmed. And what weight loss surgery does is, it shrinks the stomach, so it reduces what we take in. It can also limit our absorption of what we've eaten. But what it does do is it changes the gut hormonal environment to overcome the set point theory, something that diet and exercise can't do. And so weight loss surgery is generally recommended for people who have a BMI over 40 or 35 with some obesity related diseases. And there are actually recommendations to take it to even lower BMIs than that. And the benefits are profound. People have called it the most effective medical intervention that we have. So people who have the surgery very soon after will start to lose weight. 90% will lose 50% of their excess fat. Contrary to popular opinion, they can keep it off even if they have trouble and they gain some of it back. Losing just 5 to 10% of your body weight can have profound health benefits. It reduces the risk of obesity related diseases. So it reduces the chances, or if you already have, it reverses high blood pressure and high cholesterol and diabetes. It reduces the chances of having a heart attack, dying of a heart attack. improves sleep, it reduces osteoarthritis, it reduces the chances of getting cancer, of dying of cancer. So 40% of women 1 year after they've had weight loss surgery, it reduces the chance of getting breast cancer by 40% 1 year afterwards. And it reduces the chances of dying. And as I said earlier, it also has this effect for older people, and it's being used in kids as well, and it has benefits. It really is underutilized, though. Less than 1% of the eligible people have received it, partially because of insurance coverage issues, partially because of misperceptions regarding the dangers of weight loss surgery. And techniques have been perfected so that it's probably the dangers are not that different than something like an appendectomy or a gallbladder surgery. It's performed laparoscopically. People who've had the surgery have to modify their diet. They have to eat smaller portions and low-fat, low-sugar meals. They have to be careful not to drink before they're eating. And it's usually combined with other lifestyle modifications, exercise, but it has really profound benefits and is something to consider for people who have struggled with weight and I certainly have obesity-related diseases.
Interesting. Are there any halachic issues that are connected to weight loss surgery?
So I meant to bring this down to show our viewers, but there are many halachic questions. I actually have a book that is devoted exclusively to all the different halachic questions that arise. But just for the purpose of our podcast, for example, how do you deal with mitzvot like afikomen, and how do you deal with mitzvot related to eating and birkat hamazon, and but for the purposes of our conversation, there are issues related to the permissibility of having the surgery. Does it violate the prohibition against wounding, chavala? Does it place the person who's having it in danger? How does halacha view this surgery? We do have we have a halachic precedent for this, which is cosmetic surgery. And as you know, most poskim allow cosmetic surgery, and so that would apply to that. We could extrapolate from that to weight loss surgery. But the author of this book sampled a huge number of halachic authorities to ask them what their thoughts were on weight loss surgery, whether they allowed it, and by and large, most do. Because it has become minhag ha'olam, way of the world. In the United States, 200,000 people have it each year because it prevents diseases that can significantly impair life. The author believes that the surgery fulfills multiple mitzvot, b'nei shmartem, b'chai behem, and you shall live by them, b'hashevotolo, the obligation to return lost property, v'rapo yirape. But it's interesting that poskim don't go so far as to say that someone who suffers from obesity must have the surgery, and it's curious to me. I wonder why that might be. Perhaps because it permanently alters the body. On the other hand, we have all kinds of surgeries that permanently alter our body. Perhaps because there are other ways to address weight loss, like diet and exercise and weight loss medicine. Perhaps because we tend to place a lot of stock on diet and exercise alone.
And is that the reason why some might say, at least in Lahava, I mean, in the assumption that it would be chabala, which means wounding? We don't say that that's a problem when someone has heart surgery or an appendectomy, but you're saying in this case, some might say that because there might be other ways of achieving the same results, at least in theory.
So most people who deal with this question, and just extrapolating from cosmetic surgery, dismiss the issue of chabala, of wounding, because the Rambam limits the prohibition of wounding to wounds that are inflicted derech nitzayon, for the purposes of humiliation. And a wound that's inflicted for surgery, even cosmetic surgery, has a purpose. And it's not to humiliate. So that is not necessarily a concern.
Okay. Now, another way that people try to lose weight, especially over the past year or two, I've seen it more and more, is what's called Ozempic. And this is a drug which I know little about, but from what I understand, it's a drug for perhaps diabetes or maybe some other medical issues. But it has a secondary benefit, which is that people who take it lose their appetite, essentially, if I understand correctly. You can correct me if I'm saying something that's incorrect over here. And now people are taking it just for the sake of weight loss. So I'd like to get your take on it, both medically and halachically, because people are injecting themselves with this diabetes medication and they're using it for the secondary benefits of it. Is that something which you think, as a doctor, is okay? And as a halachicist, is it something which is okay?
So, weight loss medicine has been described as one of the most important medical inventions of the 21st century. It's revolutionary, it's transformative, it's giving hope to people who did not have hope. And what it is it's called a GLP-1 agonist, which mimics a naturally occurring hormone in the body that creates a feeling of satiety. And so people who take it can get full after just a couple of bites of food. As you mentioned, it was discovered serendipitously. It was it was originally formulated as a diabetes medicine, and people noticed that they were losing a lot of weight, and then it was reformulated for weight loss medicine, and it is actually being prescribed for that purpose, and it has profound benefits. There are many different versions of it, but people tend to lose quite a bit of weight when they're on it, and we know less about its benefits than we do about weight loss surgery. But what we do know is it lowers fairly quickly the chances, the blood sugar, and it lowers high blood pressure, and it lowers cholesterol, and it seems to lower the risk of heart attacks. What we know now lowers risk of heart attacks in people who have underlying heart disease who are taking it for weight loss. It's estimated that 46 million Americans would be eligible for this medication. You need to have a slightly lower, the eligibility criteria are looser than for weight loss surgery. 46 million Americans would be eligible for it. It would prevent 1,600,000 heart attacks over 10 years. And this is based on earlier formulations that had less profound weight loss than what we're seeing with the more recent ones. That doesn't include the benefits of preventing cancers that comes with losing weight. It doesn't include the potential benefits of preventing osteoarthritis, gallbladder disease. At the same time, it does cause nausea, vomiting, some gastrointestinal symptoms. It can lead to gastric paresis, so delayed gastric emptying. People who have thyroid, a certain kind of history of thyroid disease in their family might not be eligible. At the same time, though, as you mentioned, it is not just being used by people who have obesity. It's being used by people to just lose weight, people who are normal weight. And this is something that's been driven by Hollywood. A lot of celebrities have been using it to lose weight. Eli Lilly actually did an advertisement before the Academy Awards last year, strongly discouraging this practice. And the reason is that it denies the people who need it access to it. There has been tremendous shortages. And also, it wasn't created for this purpose. We don't know what the long-term side effects are. We hear about it in the Orthodox community. I have a simcha coming up. I just want to drop a few pounds. I want to fit into my dress. We don't know what the prevalence of this practice is, but one estimate that I heard is about a third of people who are taking these medicines are taking it purely for vanity purposes. And there are a lot of so just in terms of how halacha would approach it, I think we can divide it up into using it for medical purposes, to lose weight, and using it for cosmetic purposes. And so there have been very few poskim who've weighed in on any of these issues. There's some of the issues that may be at play are the injection issue, so chovel, which we said is less of an issue. The fact that there are long-term side effects, and that if you take that we don't know what the long-term side effects are, and that someone who takes this has to take it really for a long time, because it seems that if you stop taking it, about 2/3 of people regain the weight within a year and lose some of those cardiometabolic effects. And so how does halacha approach taking a medicine whose long-term side effects might be a problem? There's also the issue of tsar. There's a halachic debate whether halacha allows us to harm ourselves. And the classic example that the Gemara brings is that of the Nazir, who deprived himself of food. And the Rabbi Elazar HaKapar rules that one is not allowed to harm himself based on the example of the Nazir. And so are we allowed to deprive ourselves of food? Rav Moshe had a tshuva, Rav Moshe Mishpat, second chelek, number 65, on dieting, where he talks about the Gemara and the prohibition against harming oneself. Tosfot goes so far to say that one cannot deprive themselves as a form of harm, even l'tzorach, even for a purpose. And so Rav Moshe says that dieting does not violate that prohibition, because certainly when it's done for a medical purpose, one is merely substituting the tsar, the pain of dieting, for the larger pain of having a disease. He said that someone whose doctor tells them to diet is chayav to diet. And then what about doing it just for cosmetic purposes, to look good for shidduchim, to look good for your husband? Again, he does not see that as the tsar that Tosfot was talking about, the tsar that the Gemara was talking about, because we're just substituting the tsar of not eating for the joy of looking good. And so it would seem that halacha would allow, certainly for medical purposes, to deprive ourselves of food by taking weight loss medicine, and even for cosmetic reasons. That said, this all might be a moot point, because people who are taking these medicines don't feel deprived. They just don't want to eat after the first couple of bites. And so in terms of medically indicated, the larger question is, does halacha obligate someone who's obese to take weight loss medicine? Again, poskim have not weighed in on this issue. We have Rav Moshe's tshuva that says chayav, that someone who the doctor said you should diet is obligated to diet. We can intuit that weight loss medicine would fulfill v'nishmartem. In my conversations with Professor Steinberg, he felt that anything that is medically indicated, medical organizations recommend for the treatment of obesity, would fall under the category of something that we should do. But at the same time, interestingly, most doctors don't recommend weight loss medicine. Only about 3% of people who are eligible for weight loss medicine receive a prescription, and probably even fewer fill it, because insurance doesn't necessarily cover it. Medicare doesn't cover it. It's quite expensive. And why is that? Why do doctors not recommend it? Well, they don't necessarily know how to treat obesity. Only 1% of medical students had any knowledge about this. In Sweden, 50% of doctors didn't know that weight loss medicine was effective. They were unaware of its safety. 20% were unsure. There may be some elements of weight bias here. There may be some elements of just believing that people should continue dieting. But it's hard to say that there's a halachic obligation to take a medicine when the medical community doesn't push it. You go to a doctor and you suffer from obesity, and the doctor doesn't address your weight. I don't know that would necessarily qualify as malpractice, whereas if you came in with high blood pressure and he didn't address it, that probably would. And it's hard to argue you have an obligation when Medicare is not covering it, when insurance companies not covering it. So we're not there yet. In terms of the cosmetic issue, I find that question really fascinating, because on the one hand, we know that by and large, poskim allow you to have cosmetic surgery if you want to look good. And so one would think that you could just extrapolate, do copy paste from cosmetic surgery to using weight loss medicine just because you want to look good for a simcha. But there are a lot of problems with that. because cosmetic surgery is a medically accepted intervention. And the medical community frowns upon using weight loss medicine for cosmetic purposes. In fact, it does not qualify as malpractice, but the manufacturer of weight loss medicine, Eli Lilly, strongly discourages it. They did this advertisement where they said that the medicines weren't created for this purpose and people shouldn't be using it for this purpose. And one doctor has commented that, under what conditions would a drug company discourage people from using a medicine? We have to take that to heart, and we have to wonder whether virapo urape might apply under these circumstances. Health insurers, if they find out a doctor's prescribed weight loss medicine inappropriately, might actually report the doctor to a state medical board or to some federal licensing board. And so it's very hard to say that those tshuva from weight loss, from cosmetic surgery, can apply to weight loss medicine, given how the medical community approaches it.
One of the things, Sharon, that bothers me, just looking at it as an outsider here, not as a doctor, obviously, but I wonder about our priorities as human beings, as Jews, when we're so concerned about our appearance. I'm not speaking now about obesity and the opportunity to use weight loss medicine in order to overcome that. I'm talking about your example of taking off a few pounds for a simcha. So there's no harm done taking off a few pounds for a simcha, certainly by dieting. Weight loss medicine may have obviously consequences we haven't necessarily discovered yet. But that also leads to a bigger issue, which is that we have this tremendous emphasis on being thin. And while being thin is healthy, anorexia is a very serious problem. Eating disorders are a serious problem. We hear about them over and over. Rav Yoni Rosenzweig here in Beit Shemesh has talked about that, to the point that he has said, if you have an eating disorder, you need a heter to fast, even if you've overcome it. It's not simple. And just this talk about, oh, wow, I can lose a few pounds for a simcha. What could be wrong with that? It's almost a macro problem because we're emphasizing the wrong thing. We shouldn't care so much because it leads to people saying, well, if I don't take off weight, there's some problem with me.
Wow. I wish we had actually started off with that question and that issue, because I've written and spoken a great deal about obesity and things that we can do to combat obesity in the context of disease prevention, both as a doctor and as a public health specialist, and as someone who is deeply concerned with halacha. And every time I think about this, I speak about it, I worry about two things. A, that what I'm saying will contribute to fat stigma, to obesity stigma, which is profound and truly painful, and that somehow my words will encourage an eating disorder, because, as you said, anorexia is the opposite extreme of what we're talking about, and it is not any less dangerous. About 3% of the American population suffers from anorexia there, and it is the most lethal mental illness that we have. Roughly 10,000 people die from it each year, so 1 every 52 minutes. Rav Yoni's book quotes that in Nafshi B'Shelati, which I have a copy of in English and in Hebrew, reports that the mortality of anorexia can be as high as 30%. And the earlier it's detected, the better. I look at it as cancer. If you wait until it's metastasized, it's even harder to cure. And it's a problem. The Orthodox community is certainly not immune to it. Is it higher? Are the rates higher in the Orthodox community? It's hard to say. There's one study that suggests from 1996, it might be 50% higher in the Orthodox community compared to the general population, but that study wasn't published. It's something we have to be particularly sensitive to. We have to look for the warning signs. We have to think about prevention, which means modeling healthy behaviors as a parent, not to criticize our own bodies, to have a healthy relationship with food. It's a lot of responsibility, and it raises profound halachic questions, and really requires someone, a halachic authority who is well versed in these issues. Rav Yoni Rosenzweig has done tremendous work to help promote awareness. I personally have participated in his course for Rabbaniot in the community to increase awareness. And it's just something that is very, very close to my heart, and that I worry about these conversations. I think that we have to think about two areas in these conversations. First are things like weight loss medicine going to encourage eating disorder in the people who use it. And I think that concern, on the one hand, someone who's going to take weight loss medicine is probably severely restricting or trying to restrict what they're eating in the absence of weight loss medicine. You have to wonder how much more so is what's going to cause a greater problem. The restrictive behavior of trying to diet without the weight loss medicine when you're overweight or obese, or the weight loss medicine. And at the same time, I think it emphasizes the importance of using weight loss medicine in a medical setting under medical supervision, because there's such shortages, at least in the United States. People are going to telehealth services to get their weight loss medicine, where there's no follow-up, there's no supervision. They're going to compounding pharmacies, which prepare the weight loss medicine for them, but not necessarily the ingredients are FDA approved, but not necessarily what they finally receive. And so that's one area. But the other area is the message that we send to the larger community. And I am very concerned that we've done a lot to try to build this notion of body acceptance, no matter what your size, and that weight loss medicine is going to undo that. At the same time, I have to stress that this emphasis on size is not the Torah way. The Torah way, we have Eshet Chayil. Is size mentioned anywhere there? No. Shlomo HaMelech and Shir HaShirim talks about woman's body, and it's allegorical. But is her size ever mentioned? The Imahot, did we talk about her size? And Rabbi Dr. Abram Twersky in the OU a number of years ago did a movie, Hungry to be Heard, to increase awareness of anorexia. Rabbi Twersky points out that 100 years ago, no one would want a thin girl for a shidduch because it meant that she was unhealthy. And today we've reached this point where, you hear stories about mothers going to the shadchan. Well, what size is she? And really it raises questions. What's going to happen when she gains weight when she becomes pregnant? How's that going to work? And so, yes, I could go on and on and on about my concern that promoting health and trying to combat obesity might just lead us in the opposite direction. And so everything that I said and everything that we've said today, I say it with utmost humility that, please God, it should be for health and for and l'toelet, and not for something else.
Okay, that's probably a good place to stop, and a very important message which frames the entire conversation. Ultimately, the importance of combating something which is a health issue has to be separated from the idea that we should, God forbid, shame somebody for being overweight or having a body size which is not healthy. So the health issues have to be addressed, while at the same time, as a society, we have to avoid thinking of weight as this ultimate arbiter of somebody's worth or somebody's attractiveness. I mean, even in the Gemara itself, for what it's worth, Rabbi Yochanan is described in the same Masechet Brachot, as extremely fat to the point that he couldn't even roll over. And he also was considered extremely handsome. Not that that should be our arbiter of handsomeness or prettiness or beauty or anything else, but does tell us these things are entirely subjective and depends on the society. And we at least have to say, while caring about the health benefits of having an appropriate weight, not trying to turn it into the ultimate yardstick of whether somebody's a good shidduch or not.
I would just like to add that in that very Gemara, Tosfot asks, why is Gemara spending so much time talking about an Amora's weight? And the answer is so that we won't speak improperly about people who are overweight, who are people who are heavy, and really that we need to think carefully about how we talk about weight.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's very important. I hope people listen to the entire thing and hear both sides of it, the dangers of anorexia, along with the dangers of obesity, and find, God willing, the correct balance between them, both from a health perspective and a halachic perspective. Dr. Sharon Grossman, thank you.
Thank you for having me.